Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, whoever and wherever you are. My task is a little bit to talk about the Marshall Plan for Ukraine. And obviously, it's a nice concept, a symbolic one, to something which was invented almost 75 years ago to help European countries after suffering from World War II. But now this framework has been, in a way, tested in many occasions after the Second World War, because reconstruction, unfortunately, reconstruction of after-war countries hasn't been that unusual also for the last 100 years or even shorter periods. And it means also that basically we need to talk about money, we need to talk about the organization, and we also need to talk about the sequencing of different efforts. And in this regard, one has to admit that indeed, unfortunately, the Russian violent invasion and war against Ukraine has created a lot of civil casualties, a lot of damage to infrastructure. And this also means that basically there is a necessity to help countries. And this is not a question if, but when. And as we see, many of those operations are already starting. They have been started, and it also means that basically Ukraine has suffered a lot because of the war. And in addition to financial losses, there are also human losses, not only in terms of those people who have lost their lives, but also many have either left their homes inside the country to relocate or even leaving the country as refugees to other countries. The population of my country in Estonia has increased by almost 4% because of the inflow of Ukrainian refugees, and it has been indeed quite impressive how well they establish their lives here despite all those things. And indeed, it is very visible to say that they are well accepted in our society. Now let's talk about Marshall Plan. It's a framework. So although it was basically designed by US and to help mostly European countries, by the way, not every European country accepted this help. And already at this time, there was a little bit of polarization whether it's feasible and reasonable to accept the help from US or not. And basically, the idea behind Marshall Plan was that if you create economic stability, then you indeed can create also political stability. And the idea was not to distribute money, but also to provide incentives for donor countries to help to recover European countries. So basically, it's not only about money, but it's also about strategic partnerships, not in between countries only, but also in between businesses and enterprises. And another important note is that it enables a lot of knowledge and technology transfer. So even as early as during the original Marshall Plan, Soviet Union immediately thought that this is a kind of power game in between US and potentially also Soviet Union, and basically they made Eastern Bloc of Europe to reject mostly this plan. So what can be the success factors? Obviously, there are many things which rely on the success of institutions, namely law and order, but also some new things like digitalization and possibly democracy through more transparency. Another thing is also that basically it shouldn't be just a pure financial aid, but it's obviously, especially in case of such reliable partners like Ukraine, it's a bilateral exchange of people, information, and also technologies. It also means that basically there are many actors who, from their own good will and try to help Ukraine, but there is a necessity for coordination. And this means also that there is a good idea to have some kind of organization which supports the implementation of such efforts to avoid duplication, but also to avoid possible design issues with later during the reconstruction phase. And obviously what we should also expect, like during the original Marshall Plan, there will be a resistance, most likely coming from Russia. So this resistance is not always only about publicly opposing the ideas of Western countries to gain influence in Ukraine or distribute the Europe, whatever they put it. But there are also forces inside, most likely the host country, Ukraine itself, which decide or try to be vocal against the potential aid. And another thing which is also important is the phasing out from the aid programs. So there must be one good thing about Marshall Plan was that there was an exit scenario, which is timely. So basically it's for a short period related to certain ambitions, but gradually making this beneficiary of receiving the aid also to potential donor of helping other countries. So it will happen like it has always happened during the quite limited time frame, because obviously the efforts of those countries who contribute to help, they must be compensated by progress of their aid receiving country, and there are good odds that it happens in Ukraine. So basically what is different from Marshall Plan is that the original Marshall Plan was basically mostly one donor country, US, supporting many different European countries, mostly Western European countries. But when it comes to current situation, then basically what we need to think about is that we have many countries which basically join efforts and also funds to help single country. The proportions are still quite good, because if you think about the share of potential donors for Ukraine, for supporting the reconstruction of Ukraine, then basically it's about 20 times larger crowd of people in terms of population and 100 times more in terms of GDP. So basically it's doable. So it is not impossible, but one of the challenges which such kind of direction that many donors will help single country would create obviously is a coordination. So that's why what is good about current situation, differently from the 75s, almost 75 years ago when the original Marshall Plan was designed, the difference is quite clear. We do have many international organizations. I would say that it's also the case that the after-war recoveries are not that unusual. So basically we have the issues of reconstruction of Afghanistan. We have had also issues with Iraq and many other things. Those countries are, to put it bluntly, almost half of the size in terms of population of Ukraine. We know how much it costs, how easy it is to fail and to be inefficient in helping out post-war reconstructions. And now basically we have also some little bit more European cases, like basically reunification of Germany, which was basically also related to the Eastern Germany, which was almost 40% of the population of Ukraine. So such ambitions have been successful previously, and obviously there have been also many lessons learned how to do it even better now. And in addition, what is also important is that basically we should be always at least positively minded about the fact that it's not a prerequisite, but this is all very important thing at later phases of reconstruction, that there is a kind of security. So there is a necessity for some kind of military cooperation. Otherwise, we do not end up with possibility to attract foreign direct investors. So you need to not only to sell the programs and aid programs efficiently to Ukraine opinion leaders, but also to the wider investor communities, and it requires quite a significant and clear guarantees. So the good news is that we do have a lot of money. So, and what is already visible that there has been many bilateral initiatives to help Ukraine. There have been many multilateral institutions, all Western institutions like IMF, World Bank, even to some extent, obviously European Union, they have contributed already. The thing which is necessary in case of multilateral help programs is that you need to be, somebody must be in charge. And it's quite reasonable that the coordination comes from EU level for two reasons. Firstly, obviously Ukraine is a future EU country. And second, basically, it's also the fact that the success of Ukraine is mostly on the benefit of Europe in general. In addition, we have also private sources. We have sized Russian assets which are available, and obviously there is also a possibility that the money keeps flowing to Russian for oil and gas, not necessarily from Western countries, but it is also possible perhaps in some point of time also to charge it. So the good news is that the money is there. It must be reasonably used, and basically all those mechanisms, they shouldn't duplicate each other, but they should more or less complement each other, and this is quite possible and doable. When it comes to principles of reconstruction, then what we need to understand is that in the most urgent case, we need humanitarian aid, which is basically the stage 1, which is emergency response. There is not too much time to negotiate the contracts at the time when the war is coming or people are basically starving. The second stage is basically restoration of infrastructure, which gradually has bearing one challenge. This is the question, what is the optimal design? It's not always feasible in this restoration phase to restore exactly 100% of the copy of the previous structure of economy. And therefore, the greatest challenges rely there that what is possible, what is urgent, but what is basically doable, and what kind of role those investments will play in future when basically we lay down the foundations for future growth and modernization, which is a kind of longer-term project. We are talking about years mostly. And this is, I would say that the best role model for this is actually EU integration of Poland, for example, because Poland increased in terms of income per head almost 80% within the first decade. And it also means that basically this is perhaps one of the success stories of EU expansion, which has been quite important to note, that has been indeed successful. And of course, there are certain elements which also mean that in addition to giving advice and to some extent also orchestrating all those funds and also other resources, not only financial resources, but also perhaps human capital transfer, you need also to have Ukrainians in charge for owning the project, or basically to making decisions, and the coordination is quite important to preserve ownership, because here we need to compete also with those people perhaps in Ukraine who still believe to some extent that they can be Russian-minded or become part of the Russian influence. And this means that we have very, very urgent necessity to think about also how to make Ukrainians as much as possible to decide on the potential options. And of course, last but not least, Ukraine will win this war, obviously. There will be in the quite near future, Ukraine will become also EU member. It means also that Ukraine is still quite successful in terms of higher education. Ukrainians are quite educated already now, but they have a lot to benefit from research and development, and also from education cooperation, which is obviously also the business of universities. We also know that perhaps the new rebuilt Ukraine is not necessarily the exact copy of the previous one, because many perhaps mistakes can be skipped, which happened during the evolutionary development of urban environments and many other things, which means that we do know that already now that perhaps some European countries even have much more ambitions than perhaps possibilities because of legacy infrastructures and systems. Ukraine can skip some stages of development and start from relatively unlimited options in terms of modernizing their countries. And last but not least, one has to also consider that basically we shouldn't overestimate the financial efforts, but we should never underestimate the factor of hope. So even the fact that we are currently designing the plans, organizing things which are a little bit even beyond the most urgent humanitarian aid considerations, we are basically giving advice as good as we can to redesign perhaps the reconstruction. We try to squeeze out everything from the experience of post-war reconstruction programs, even post-Marshall Plan, and combining it with the experience in good and bad with reunification of Germany and EU expansion. So I believe that Ukraine will become a success story, and hope is one thing which such plans, which are obviously based on the trivial assumption that Ukraine will win this war very soon. I would say that has already won this war, despite the fact that it's not yet perhaps visible that much. It also means that such plans, like Marshall type of plans, generate hope for our fellow Ukrainians to survive this difficult time. Thank you.